This is Antic, the Atari 8-Bit podcast. I'm Kay Savitz. Jack Verson was founder of JV Software, where he programmed and published several games for the Atari 8-bit computers: Action Quest, Ghost Encounters, and Journey to the Planets. Roklan Software repackaged Action Quest and Ghost Encounters into a single game titled Castle Hassle. As part of Ontime Software, Jack programmed the Atari versions of Gyruss, James Bond 007, and perhaps other games published by Parker Brothers. He ported the Atari 8-bit version of Joust to the Commodore 64. As applied systems engineering, he programmed Time Tunnel, also for the Commodore 64. This interview took place on December 2nd, 2021.
Okay, how I got into computers. I went to Purdue University in the 60s. I was originally a physics major, but back in those days, Purdue was one of the first schools in the country, I think, to offer a degree in computer science, which they didn't offer when I started. But they did offer computer science classes. And so I started taking them. And eventually, my junior year, I decided to switch to computer science. So I graduated in 71 with a degree in computer science, probably one of the first people in the US to actually have that degree. Then I worked for a year and a half, and I went to graduate school at Maryland, and I got a master's in computer science. And then after that, I came out here to California and I had a job for 5 months at a company out here, and they had a serious financial issue, so I decided to leave them. Got another job with another company. And then back in the early 80s, one of my good friends was one of the founders of Activision. And he told me that he thought I could make some money writing computer games. And great, it's nothing I'd ever done before, although I used to play the word games. I never played the real action games. Mm-hmm. So I borrowed his Atari 800 computer, and I went to an arcade and looked around at some games and came with an idea for a game, which was Action Quest. So while I was working full time, I sat down in my family room and I came up with the ideas for the game and coded them up on the Atari 800 using that as my platform. After about 9-10 months, I finished the game. And I said, now what do I do with this? So I went out and bought an Atari computer. I guess we jumped forward from the pre-times real fast.
We did. Who was your friend who worked at Activision? Was it Gary Kaplan?
Larry, yeah. His name was Larry.
Oh, sorry, Larry. Larry Kaplan.
Yeah. Actually, when he started Activision, his first game that he did on the Activision platform was Bridge. And the people at that time thought Bridge was going to be a big seller because it was popular, but it's not really a big seller for that platform. But anyways, I was the consultant because I'm a big Bridge player.
You are thanked in the manual.
Oh, okay. I guess I forgot about that. So I was a consultant for the Bridge game, and he produced that. And that's one of the reasons. He also worked with me at this one of the interim companies I was in before I started games. So that's where I met him. He was a programmer there too. He said I could, they actually tried to talk me into going over to Atari before he left. But like a fool, I didn't think there was a lot of money in games at the time. So I kind of did the game thing out of fun. Mm-hmm. And I thought I could make up a couple extra bucks, to supplement my income.
Sure.
So when I finished that, I bought an Atari magazine, the kind that people advertise in. Mm-hmm. And I saw who was advertising, which companies. So I found a couple of bigger ads and I sent them all free copies of the game saying, hey, do you want to buy this? And much to my surprise, most of them came back and made purchases. Because back in those days, there were not a lot of games that were not basic oriented. I did mine in assembly, and assembly ran faster, had better response times. So I managed to sell a few hundred games, and then in my other job, I was still working and going on business trips. I was a programmer, and as I went on a business trip, I would always pack a few games with me in my suitcase, find a local retail store that sold Atari products. I went down there and offered it to them. And more times than not, they actually picked them up. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah. So coming out of the gate with your first program for the Atari on a borrowed Atari, it sounds like, being an assembly language game, that's aggressive. Most people wouldn't do that. I assume you learned assembly language because of your degrees?
Well, I knew assembly language for various computers. Mm-hmm. I didn't know it for this computer. But once you have the basic concept, it doesn't take you a long time to learn. So it was, I mean, I didn't really start it from the point of view that that was going to be a business. I was hoping it might be, but my expectations were not high that it would be. So I did it more or less as a hobby.
Sure. Were you using the Atari Assembler Editor cartridge?
Yeah, something I think called EASMD.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Editor Assembly Debugger.
You're right.
It was really slow. I remember when I wrote a version of the software I wanted to test, I would actually start assembling and go eat dinner. It would take about 45 minutes when I was towards the end and everything was in there. In the later days, I found when it was a little bit fast, it would take about a minute. So when I said this is slow, it was really, really slow. But I did my entire development using the Atari computer, which was borrowed, but I eventually bought it from him. Down in my basement in the evenings, not basement, they don't have basements in California, but down in the lower room. And then I eventually sold it.
Where did the idea come from? You said you went to the arcade, but I don't know of a lot of arcade games about ghosts floating around solving puzzles. So
the only thing I got from the arcade was there was a game at that time where you went from room to room and tried to beat up vicious critters. And when you captured that, when you solved that issue, you went to a higher room. And that's the only concept I got for the games. Everything else is just thought up. I thought up 30 rooms and how I thought different puzzles for each of them. I tried to make it more of a puzzle solving game than an action game, although I realized that people wanted some actions in them. The only really innovative part I thought I did was I had 3 levels, and it was child, adult, the highest level was teenager.
That's funny.
So I sold that, and I probably sold several thousand games, and which is great for supplementing your income since you have a real job. Then I came out with another game called Ghost Encounters, which effectively was just a continuation of Action Quest, just some more ideas. And when that started selling well, I quit my job and became a software consultant, program consultant half-time, and I wrote the games half-time. Back in those days, there was not a lot of competition. So an idea which somebody could buy a game and play it for a few hours and feel they got their money's worth was all you needed. Graphics was nice, but graphics is not my bailiwick. So I was not very good at that. And I admit that, but you do what you can with your capabilities.
Sure.
And after that, I had an idea for Journey to the Planets, which you probably know, where you go into a rocket ship and you go around the universe and go to various planets and try to solve problems. But it's the same thing. You land on a planet, you still try to solve a problem. I think in that one, I took a step back in the bad graphics that were in the beginning and made it really worse. But like I said, that was what I could do at the time.
Many companies created, small companies created games. They advertised in magazines to sell the games like you did. But most of these other companies had little quarter or eighth page ads in the back of the magazine. You were buying full color, full-page ads in a wide variety of computer magazines. That's pretty unusual. Can you tell me about that?
Well, it's just return on investment. I mean, I think that if you spend $100 putting an ad in the back, you can get very little response. If you spend $1,000 putting an ad in the front, I mean, you don't have to sell a lot more games to make it worthwhile. So if you can do something, you have to do it right. But I don't know if it really cost me $1,000. It might have cost me something more, but I figured, if I sold another 25 games because of that, I paid for the difference in the ads. And I certainly did more than that. So you're right. The company was only me. There was nobody else in it. Although I did hire a graphic artist to do the covers for the packaging.
So Action Quest and Ghost Encounters were published by you, JV Software, right? And then I believe Journey to the Planets was originally by you, but then it was also marketed by Roklan?
Well, all three games were marketed by Roklan.
Were they? Okay.
As it turns out, eventually the market fell out for people of my size. I mean, you needed, $1 million to make a game. Eventually, you needed to have good graphics, and people just weren't buying my type of games anymore. Roklan came along and wanted to, and also I didn't have the money to develop a cartridge. I put it on a disc and I put it on cassette. And Roklan came along and wanted to put the games on a cartridge. And since I wasn't really making any more money, I said, okay, so I joined them. They took Ghost Encounters and Action Quest and combined them into one game and put it on a cartridge. And I forgot what that game was called.
Castle Hassle.
Yeah, Castle Hassle. Okay. Yeah, see, you know more than I do. Anyways, so they went along and marketed. As it turned out, they didn't do very good either. So when they dissolved, 4 of the programmers that were left over from Roklan, me being one of them, formed a new company. I think it was called Ontime Software. Do you have that in your records too?
I knew that you did some stuff for Ontime Software. I wasn't sure if you were involved with the company or not, but now I know.
I was the main person there. We had basically we got a contract with Parker Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
And the contract with Parker Brothers, we developed one game of ourselves called James Bond. They bought the rights to James Bond, and we developed the James Bond game. We did it for the Commodore 64, for Atari, for the little Atari game machine, the 2600, something called ColecoVision, and there might have been another game platform out at that time. But there were 4 of us, and we each had our own target computer we wrote for. Although the Commodore 64 and the Atari 800 were the same microprocessor and virtually the same internals. Anyways, we wrote for that game, and then Parker Brothers bought a bunch of arcade games, Gyruss, Mr. Deuce Castle, etc., and they paid us to convert those to the 4 platforms. And that probably lasted about 3 or 4 years.
I don't see the James Bond game listed for the Atari as an Ontime Software title. Maybe it wasn't released, or
it was never released under Ontime Software. It was always released under Parker Brothers.
Oh, under Parker Brothers. Okay.
Okay. We just were hired by Parker Brothers to do the games.
Okay, sure.
I don't think there's anything Ontime Software, although when it finally got dissolved, one of the guys kept the name, and I think he did some software consulting under it, but I have no idea what he did. 2 of us were in Chicago and 2 of us were in California. And I remember in those days, we transferred data back and forth over, I think we finally upgraded to a 1200 baud modem.
Fancy.
And so, it would take an hour to transfer things back and forth. But it worked. You started to transfer, you went out to lunch, and you came back.
Sure. So were you the programmer for the James Bond game, or just one of the team?
Yeah, I did it for I was a programmer for all of them, for the Atari, and other people were for other platforms. I did have a staff of 2 other people, working in California. California is where we had our office. The people in Chicago worked at home. This is just a little aside. I got started on this by Atari hired Roklan to do Joust for the Commodore 64 because Atari had already released Joust for their Atari computer. And they hired a programmer at Roklan who said he could do it in 5 months. And 4 months into it, he got nowhere. So I came on board and said, I asked them if they had the cartridge for the Atari 800. They said, yes. I said, well, I can do this in 3 weeks. So what happens is they gave me the cartridge for the Atari 800. I took it through a deassembler. So I took the binary, created assembly out of it, and then reassembled so it ran on the Atari 800. Then I tweaked it for the Commodore 64 and gave it back to them. And this fulfilled their obligation, but they weren't happy because they gave me the same bug list that the Atari version had. But anyways, that was an aside because at my age, when you remember something, you got to act on it before you forget it.
Please. I love that stuff. I believe while we're talking about Commodore, I just discovered last night that very recently, a couple of months ago, they found a prototype of Popeye for the Commodore that I believe you also worked on. It says it's not the version that was released. It was a completely different development. It was worked on by you for Ontime Software.
It's possible. Popeye was another arcade game, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I forgot about that one, but there's a good chance.
Do you remember doing any other arcade conversions when you were at Ontime?
I don't think so. This was as a chance. I had arcade games in my garage that got delivered. They got loaned to me for the time. I remember Gyruss was one of the first ones we did.
Sure. I played a lot of your Gyruss on the Atari 800. As with all the games I had, I did not pay for it. I apologize, yeah. But that was a fun game with great music.
Yeah. Speaking of copy protection, I remember the first game I came out with was Action Quest, and I released it only on diskette, on floppy. I didn't put it on cassette yet. And on floppy, I had a copy protection program, which I think was pretty good. What happens is I would write the disk at my house, and halfway through the write, I'd turn the computer off. And then I'd read the disk back in. Well, turning the computer off during a write would cause a fatal parity error on one of the blocks on the disk. So I read the thing back in until I got a parity error, and I recorded in the game what track that parity error was on. And the game would not work unless it read the disk in and got a fatal read error at a certain track on a disk. And that seemed to work. But then eventually you have to release it on cassette. You can't do anything there.
Seems like a super low-tech way to do copy protection.
I know, but you can't, discs can't copy and copy a bad block.
Right.
It did seem to work. I also did produce one other game. When I eventually left Ontime Software, I started another company, which I was at for 30 years doing non-game stuff. But before I left there, I had written a game called Time Tunnel for the Commodore 64 only, which was released by US Gold in London, England, Great Britain, something like that. I don't think I ever got paid for it, but my company name was Applied Systems Engineering. And so we reduced that game under the name Applied Systems Engineering. And Time Tunnel was conceptually like Journey to the Planet, except we did hire an artist to do the graphics. But instead of going from planet to planet, you went from time period to time period and solving problems. So that's a game, but probably doesn't have my name on it anywhere. It might, I don't know. I've already looked this up.
Cool.
But that was the last thing I did.
So did you get feedback from players? I noticed in some of your manuals, it said, you could send in $1 for a tip, or you could send in your high scores and get featured in an ad, or did you just get any fan mail or any feedback like that?
I don't remember that. I get, every once in a while, like you just contacted me. I still got contact about once every 3 or 4 years from some people. This sort of game strikes the mentality of a subset of people. I mean, they either like playing these games where basically there's not a lot of action and they have to think and it makes them feel good to solve problems, or they don't. But the people that do seem to really like it. So every once in a while, I get a call from someone saying, "Were you this person?" Someone actually came in, about 5 years ago with some of my old advertisements and had me autograph them. So it's kind of fun. I get comments, but not too often. And as far as what happened back in the 80s, I don't really recollect. I probably got, I'm sure I got some responses.
Do you have any of the source code anymore?
No, I have no idea what that is.
I have to ask.
Yeah.
Matter
of fact, I don't have anything. I don't have any brochures. I don't have any cartridges. I mean,
wow.
No boxes or whatever. I still get shocked whenever anybody contact. I mean, I only recently realized that, well, maybe about 5 years ago, you can get emulators and run the games on them.
You said to Compute Magazine, I wouldn't call myself a game fanatic, but I do go into arcades now and then. Mm-hmm. You said, I know some people who try to copy arcade games almost verbatim, changing it just enough to avoid problems with the legal staff. I think this was before your arcade conversions came out. This was more like Ghost Encounters time. So it seemed like you were really working to come up with unique ideas for your games rather than just rehashing the same old stuff again.
No, everything was entirely my idea. I didn't get it from anybody. Yeah, I'm pretty big into copyright privileges are something you should adhere to. I mean, I wasn't very excited when people would copy my games, but then you can't do anything about that. So you gotta kind of move on.
Sure.
Where did you get that? You have old articles about me?
I was searching Internet Archive mostly.
Okay.
Yeah. Another thing I found there, and I loved this, a review of Action Quest by Mark Benioff, who grew up to be the founder of Salesforce and a billionaire today.
Oh, yeah.
He gave a very glowing review to Action Quest.
No kidding. I did not know that. Maybe I should ask him for a loan or something.
Right. Yeah. Did you pay for this game, Mark? You owe it to me with interest.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Did you pay for the game? Let's see. It was $29.50 back then, and compounded with interest, it's probably up to $100 by now.
Sure, he can afford it.
Although I only got $12. I mean, I eventually went through SoftCell and other distributors. I mean, you have to go through distributors to get rid of your games. You can't do direct sales all the time. And once it got discounted, I think I got 40% of the price. What
caused you to get out of this business?
I wasn't selling anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I realized that in order to write games, you needed a graphics department. And the cost of writing a game was more than my income from a game. I mean, you needed to start a real company. It couldn't be just one person anymore. Back in the days I started, most of the games out were just word games. You know, the old Zork and stuff like that, where you had to find the right word in order to advance from room to room. So those don't take much to write. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't compete anymore. That's why I went to Roklan, because I thought they were more legitimate company, which it turns out I don't think they were.
more legitimate. They were just bigger, slightly bigger, I think.
Yeah, they weren't there. I don't know. They had 20 people, which I guess is bigger than one.
Sure. So, yeah. You know. What do you do today?
Well, I'm retired. I worked most of my career in an industry called SCADA, which doesn't mean too much to most people, but it basically is something that handles telephone line communication protocols for the electrical power industry to use to control substations. I don't do the substations. I don't do the controlling stations. I just write software that monitors the communication to see if anything's okay. And I had a company of about 10 people for 25 years, 30 years, and eventually sold it to a company from India who runs it today locally. I kind of dabble like I did in games. I left, and then I eventually wrote my own software in the same industry. And I started another one-person company, which runs today, which is just me. The company is called CDON, which is acronym CDOAN. And the acronym stands for Can't Decide on a Name, because I had trouble. But I think I've been around. I have a website, and I've been around for a couple years. And so far, it's cost me maybe $2,000, but I've made 500.
Wow, good job.
So,
and what does CDON do?
it actually writes software which is competitive to the company that I sold.
Oh, I see. Right. What's
somewhat competitive?
Mm-hmm.
I got CDON because I thought I could get the CDON website, because who would come up with a company name like CDON? Then I found out that in Florida there's a guy named Charlie Doan who has a website, and I couldn't seem to get it from him, so I had to come up with another name. But so, I basically do that because I still program, and it's just it's a way people spend their time. Some people spend it playing golf, which I did, and got frustrated, or other things. So
programming is never frustrating. So
right. Programming is never frustrating.
What language? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Programming is less frustrating when you don't have deadlines and you don't have anybody yelling at you if you don't do it. C#.
C#'s your language of choice?
That's the only one I could. Yeah. C++, I never got my head around. C# has enough support in the compiler. You don't have to do things. You don't have to do too much graphic wise.
Well, if you ever felt the inclination to make Atari 800 games again, the cross compilers and tools that they have now are amazing. So
okay,
you don't have to wait hours for it to compile anymore.
They're even faster than they were in 1980. Huh?
A little bit.
I remember the packaging too. I didn't have a lot of money. I didn't want to spend money on machines. So the packaging for the first game, I got a little cardboard insert that you fold it over in half and put the disc inside it. And I packaged it inside a seal meal. If you know what those were, those are little plastic things. The little heat would seal the end of it.
Yeah.
So after that, I got boxes made. But unfortunately, I made a mistake in the boxes.
What was that?
Most of the boxes for games of this type were big boxes. They were much larger than required to hold the cassette or the disc. And I foolishly thought that was a waste. So I had this artist design a box for me, which was just the right size. The problem is the reason they had the big boxes was for marketing purposes. You have a bigger box as it looks like you're getting more. And I didn't realize that. I wanted to be efficient. So I remember at that time, Sears was thinking of buying my game and putting it in their stores. And they dropped out at the last minute because my box was the wrong size to fit in their racks. So I could have made quite a bit more, but once I get reincarnated and do this all over again, I'll capitalize on that experience.
Oh, good. Yeah, let me know how that goes.
Okay. Well, I've actually scheduled it. It's 2071 in Siena.
Great. Good. What haven't I asked you about that time that I should have?
Don't know how to say that. I'm kind of happy that you called. It's it's good to go back to those days. I mean, luckily, you hit me at the right time because my long-term memory is still pretty good. Matter of fact, someone called me a while ago, and I said I got together a dinner for him, and I forgot about it for a year. So I finally called him up a year later, and I said, at my age, you have a problem with short-term memory, which is why I didn't call you back. But luckily, it's been so long that it's rolled over my long-term memory. So here I am.
Nice.
But anyways, no, I can't think of anything you haven't asked.
If you could send a message to the people who are still playing with their Atari computers today, and you can right now, what would you tell them?
They're still playing with Atari computers, or still playing my games with Atari computers?
Sure. Yes, playing your games. They're devoted to playing your games.
I'm just saying, I'm glad that I wrote a game that you liked. It's when I released it, I didn't know that anybody was going to buy it, and I'm really thrilled that people are interested in it. And if you like them, you might try to find a copy of Time Tunnel, because if you like my other games, you'll like that one too. I never got any money for it, but it's out there. I know. It's a Commodore 64 game.
Great.
So, I mean, thanks. It's always nice to be recognized like that.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
Okay. Okay, Kate. Thanks a lot.
Right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.